Mike hadn't run for 9 months due to his Achilles pain. He was trying to train for his first marathon, but he couldn't even run around the block. He'd just been for another visit to the doctor who told him that he needed to rest for another month, and if it still wasn't better, they were just going to put him in a boot. At this point, he felt completely hopeless, just like the healthcare system had completely failed him, and he felt like he was going to have to quit running for good. He came to me wondering how on earth he was going to fix his Achilles tendonitis, and I told him that tendons essentially will hurt when they're not strong enough to do their job, so if you want it to stop hurting, you have to make it stronger. Healing an Achilles tendon is a lot like raising a child. There are different phases, and with each phase come new challenges. The first phase is the baby phase. The tendon gets angry for even the tiniest of reason. It's completely incapable of doing anything for itself, just like a baby. You can't even think about running on it. Even walking hurts sometimes, and if you do try and run, it hurts quite a lot the next morning when you get out of bed. In the baby phase, you have to protect the tendon. Just keep it safe and don't do anything that it doesn't like. Give it a week or two to calm down. Just like with a baby, the only job you have in this phase is to do whatever it wants. And Mike had totally nailed this phase, so all he was doing was just avoiding anything that hurt. And this worked really well. When he stopped running, the pain in the tendon went away entirely. The only problem was that whenever he did try to run, the pain would just flare up immediately, straight away. Mike couldn't baby his tendon forever. He had to move on to the next phase. The next phase is the kid phase. The tendon is not completely useless, but it's not all that useful either, just like a kid. You can run on it a bit, but not very much. Maybe you can do some run walks, but if you try to run anything like an hour continuously, you'd be limping on the way home. In the kid phase, you have to start to challenge the tendon a little bit, but in a very safe environment. Just like with a kid, you want to give it challenges that it can do, but in a way that protects it from any real danger. In this phase, just like with a kid, your job is to tread that fine line between an overbearing helicopter parent and a complete deadbeat absentee father. This is where Mike needed a little guidance. We started off with some very easy calf raises, just body weight and moving really slowly. The idea being that we want to start to challenge the tendon a little bit, but just in a very safe way. And we wanted to do this frequently. So we had him doing it once, twice, or even 3 times a day, but in a way that didn't provoke any pain in the tendon. So if he got out of bed the next morning and it was sore, we knew that we'd pushed a little bit too hard. We continued this every day for a few weeks, gradually challenging the tendon to adapt to that stress and gradually increasing the challenge that we placed on the tendon as it proved to us that it was capable of tolerating that task. In due time, we were able to add weights to the calf raises and do more reps, and then we gradually transitioned into some hopping exercises and bouncing like pogo jumps and that kind of thing, but again, still monitoring the pain very closely for any signs that we were doing too much. The next phase is the teenager phase. The tendon is actually quite capable in some ways, but completely useless in others, just like a teenager. You can do steady runs for maybe an hour and maybe even some short tempo runs, but if you try to push it with any intensity or longer runs, it'll get angry and be painful the next day. The tendon is good at most stuff, but it has trouble with specific stuff, usually long runs, hills, or sprint intervals. Much like parenting, the teenager phase is actually the hardest. You have to push the tendon to adapt to the kind of challenges that it can't yet handle and force it to do things that it really doesn't want to do. You have to take more risks and trust that your tendon can rise to the occasion. Just like with a teenager, it's time for you to step back and let it fend for itself. When Mike reached this phase, he was having trouble with his long runs and hills. So after a long run of about 90 minutes, he was okay. But if he tried to go up to like 2 hours, the tendon would hurt the next day. Similarly with hills, when he chose a route that was a little bit more hilly, he would find that his tendon was a bit sore the next morning. Rather than avoid these things as we might have done in previous phases, it was time for us to lean into them. We had Mike do hill sprints and long runs every week. Not so much that the tendon really flared up, but just enough so that it started to complain a little bit. Essentially, just like a teenager, if it was complaining, we knew that we were working it hard enough. The next phase is the adult phase. Now the tendon is fully capable and adapted to its environment. Just like an adult, it can handle anything that the world throws at it and remain calm. Most of them anyway. You can run as long or as fast as you want to. You can run in hawkers, bare feet, Wellington boots, sandals, whatever you want. The tendon is strong enough to do its job, whatever you decide that job is. In the adult phase, you need to continue to push that tendon. If it's not regularly challenged, it will become weak and incapable. It needs that stimulus in order to adapt and retain its strength. You mustn't protect the tendon at all. It needs to be trained regularly so that it's ready for anything. When Mike reached this phase, he was in his element, back to pushing his body and his tendon to the limits. For Mike, the job that he wanted his tendon to do was marathon training, and his tendon had to be up to the challenge of all of the stresses that marathon training would place on it. High weekly mileage, long runs, speed intervals, sprint intervals, all of this kind of stuff that we want to throw at the tendon and make sure that it's strong enough and capable enough to tolerate those stresses and adapt to them without complaining. After 9 months of rehabilitation, Mike ran that first marathon and his tendon didn't hurt at all. If you're having trouble with your Achilles tendon and you just can't seem to get it to heal, click the link in the description to book a free call with us and we'll have a chat and see if we might be able to help.